The Case of the Vanishing Violinist, Enola Holmes. Chapter 1. The fog of early November clung to the London streets like a secret waiting to be whispered. It wrapped itself around gas lamps and muffled the sound of passing carriages, allowing the city's darker corners to breathe in silence. But in a quiet alley off Cavendish Square, tucked between an apothecary and a clockmaker's, the stillness was broken by the sound of music. Not just any music, a violin. A haunting, breathless melody that rose and fell as if the instrument itself were mourning. And then, quite suddenly, it stopped. I had not meant to hear it. Truly. I was only passing by. Returning from a visit to my mother's old acquaintance, a former suffragette now selling scandalous literature under the guise of women's medical remedies, a visit which, incidentally, yielded little in terms of clues about my current case, but much in the way of uncomfortable herbal tea. But that violin, there was something about it. The way it filled the space between breaths. It wasn't just music, it was pleading, begging. And then, silence. Not a fading end, not a final note. A cut. Abrupt. Wrong. I paused, turning my head slowly. I knew that sort of silence. I had learned to listen to absences as well as sounds. And this absence chilled me. The building from which the sound had come was narrow and brick, its windows dusty, its knocker tarnished with green. A wrought-iron sign hung askew above the door, Madame Rustova, music lessons for the gifted. Gifted, indeed. The girl, or boy, I had no idea, who had been playing could not have been more than 16, judging by the emotion in the phrasing. That was a guess, yes, but not an uninformed one. I stepped closer. The fog seemed thicker near the entrance, as if reluctant to let me in, or perhaps warning me not to enter. I knocked. Nothing. Knocked again. Still. Nothing. I turned the handle, locked. Then, through the brass mail slot, I slid down to one knee, adjusted my skirts and peeked inside. It was dark. Not the sort of dark that meant no one was home, but the kind that meant someone had forgotten to relight the lamps, or perhaps had left in a hurry, or never intended to return. Curiosity is a dreadful thing. Like a violin string pulled too tight, it must either snap or sing. I chose the latter. Retrieving a small pin from the hem of my sleeve, I made quick work of the lock. Madame Rustova would be furious, no doubt, if she found me inside, but I had no intention of being caught. The door creaked open. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the faint scent of varnish. Instruments lined the walls like sleeping soldiers. Violins, violas, a lone cello in the corner. Sheet music scattered the floor like fallen leaves. And there, on a faded velvet stool near the window, sat a violin. Alone. But no bow. No case. No player. The silence was pressing now. A silence that hummed, with something unsaid. I stepped carefully, my boots barely making a sound on the worn wooden floorboards. The place felt abandoned, and yet, not entirely. A cup of tea, half drunk, sat on the windowsill, still faintly warm. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. I turned toward the fireplace, where a small music stand had been placed. A single sheet of music rested upon it. I leaned in to read it, but it was not music, not entirely. There were notes, yes, but also letters embedded into the bars. Certain notes circled, others faintly smudged. A cipher. I had seen such clever concealments before. In wartime missives, in my mother's secret codes, in the correspondences of clever girls who passed secrets across drawing-room floors without ever uttering a word. This was a message, or a warning. I turned the sheet over, on the back in fine slanted handwriting. The notes lie. But the silence screams. My breath caught. A whisper of movement behind me made me spin. No one. I was alone. Or I had been. I stepped toward the back hallway, where the light grew thinner and the shadows longer. There were rooms branching off left and right, practice chambers likely. Each door slightly ajar. I reached the third one, hand on the doorknob. Inside, the mirror had been smashed. Glass shards glittered on the floor like ice, and across the far wall, written in what looked like red ink, but smelled metallic and wrong, were the words, "She played too well." A creak behind me. I whirled again. Still no one. But the front door, once shut, was now swinging wide open, and outside the fog had thickened. I ran to it, peered through the mist. No figure. But footsteps in the frost led away, one set only, heading toward Cavendish Street. I hesitated. Chased or chasing? And then I saw it. Pinned to the door frame by a broken violin string, coiled tight like a threat, was a scrap of cloth. A scrap I recognized, because it matched the hem of a dress I'd seen just yesterday, on a girl no older than myself, performing in the square, a girl with quick fingers, a frightened smile, and eyes that didn't quite match the music she played. Her name, though I doubted it was her real one, had been Lena. She had vanished, and left behind only silence. But I had heard the scream inside it, and I would find her, even if it meant becoming the next note struck. Chapter 2. It is a peculiar sensation to chase someone you cannot see. I stood in the doorway of Madame Ristova's music studio, one hand still gripping the broken violin string that had held the cloth scrap in place. The fog curled inward like an intruder, licking the threshold, daring me to follow those fading footprints on the frost-covered cobbles. And I did. Because curiosity is a burden and a blade, and I've grown quite adept at bleeding from it. I stepped into the cold, pulling my coat tight around me. The footprints were faint, just enough pressure to disturb the frost, but not enough to sink. Whoever had made them was light, quick, and likely aware of my presence. I moved cautiously, staying close to the walls. The alley opened into Cavendish Street, normally lively with shoppers and cab drivers, but now it was quiet. The kind of quiet London only allows when something is terribly wrong. I followed the trail past the milliner's shop, down a narrow side lane I hadn't noticed before. Here the fog thickened, and the air shifted. Wetter, heavier, tinged with the faintest notes of something metallic. Not blood, no, but old water pipes, rusting iron. Below the street, a sewer grate. Recent, slightly ajar. I crouched beside it. Something had scraped the metal rim, fresh scratches, shallow but deliberate, the sort made by metal striking metal, and just beside it, tangled in the grating, was a hair. Long, blonde, Lena's. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But the violin music, the abandoned studio, the message scrawled in something resembling blood. And now this? These weren't accidents. This wasn't a girl who had fled home for romance or stolen pennies from the till. This was something crafted, orchestrated, and someone was still composing the next movement. I replaced the grate quietly and stood. A chill skated down my spine, not from the wind, but from a prickling in the back of my neck. The sense of eyes. Watching. I turned. Empty fog. Still. I lingered only a moment before moving back into the livelier part of Cavendish, heading toward a place that might hold answers. The London House of Music. It was 3 streets over, behind the old conservatory. I'd passed it many times. An opulent red-brick building with carved instruments adorning its cornices and marble busts in its windows. Musicians from all over the empire trained here, but more importantly, I had seen Lena there 3 days ago. She had been outside the gates, arguing with someone, a boy, perhaps a year older than her, in a black coat with silver buttons and a violin case slung over one shoulder. Their voices had been hushed, but the intensity unmistakable. She had grabbed his sleeve. He had turned away, and I had been too polite to eavesdrop. How foolish. The House of Music loomed above me now, its gates locked at this hour. But to a Holmes, that meant very little. I scaled the side wall with minimal effort, less from athleticism, more from knowing precisely where the ivy had grown thick enough to support weight. My boots crunched softly against the gravel as I landed in the side courtyard. There were lights in a few of the upper windows, where boarding students practiced late. I kept to the shadows, my breath forming clouds before me, and circled toward the west wing, practice room, B, the room Lena had emerged from that same day. The door was locked. I knelt, drew the same pin from my sleeve. Click. Inside was warmth, stale but welcome. The scent of resin and chalk dust, a chalkboard with faded notes and bowing instructions, a single music stand, empty, and to the side, a desk drawer, ajar. I moved to it. Inside, a series of performance schedules, student critiques, and beneath them, a folded letter addressed only with an initial L. I read it by moonlight. You must stop playing it. It is not safe. I warned you what would happen. They are listening. I heard them last night beneath the floor. 3 knocks. They want silence. If you value your fingers, your voice, or your life, burn the sonata. I cannot protect you anymore. No signature. Just the faint mark of a black ink blot at the bottom, unintentional, but shaped like a crescent moon. I committed it to memory. I was about to fold it back when I noticed something scratched into the underside of the drawer, barely visible. A name. Julius Fenwick. I recognized it. He was the prodigy student from the north, the boy in the silver-buttoned coat, the one arguing with Lena. Rumours claimed he could hear pitch at an impossible level. Others said he'd been expelled from his first conservatory for composing a symphony that drove someone mad. I doubted that last part, but what was certain? He had been close to Lena, and he wanted her to stop playing something. I was about to leave when I heard it. A sound from above. Not footsteps, not voices. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, deliberate, directly above me. And then a violin. Just 3 notes, high and sharp. Almost like a cry. Then silence. I froze. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the house creaking. It was a message. I darted out of the room, heart hammering, taking the service stairs 2 at a time. The upper floor was quieter, older, less used. Some of the rooms were locked, others empty. The knocking had come from the end of the corridor, room 312. I stood before it, hand on the knob. The plaque on the door had been scratched so deeply that the numbers barely showed. I pushed it open. Inside was a single chair, a broken bow, a violin string, coiled, just like the one from Madame Rustova's doorframe, and a photo on the wall. Framed in silver. It was of 5 students, 4 boys, 1 girl, all wearing uniforms, all holding violins. Lena was the girl. Julius stood behind her, and in the background, if one looked closely, stood a man in shadow. Just a sliver of him visible in the mirror behind them, his face hidden, but his hand, gloved, reached toward the piano keys like a spider ready to pounce. A gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me, but I didn't startle. I was already staring at the base of the chair, because carved into the wood, so faint it had nearly vanished, were the words, "They listen in silence." And beneath it, "Room 407 midnight, come alone." The violin had screamed. Now it was time to answer. Chapter 3. There's a strange stillness in a school after dark. No laughter, no footsteps, no warnings. Just air and silence, as though the walls themselves are holding their breath. Room 407. I stood before the door, just as the clock tower struck midnight. 12 dull, resonant chimes that seemed to echo down the very bones of the conservatory. My gloved hand hovered over the handle. "Come alone," the message had said, but I never go unarmed. In my coat pocket rested a sharpened letter opener, disguised as a knitting needle. In my sleeve, a lockpick. And in my boot, a folded note containing Julius Fenwick's name and that cryptic warning to Lena. Each item a precaution, each precaution a lesson from my mother. Truth must be pursued with teeth bared, not wide eyes. I turned the handle. The room beyond was dimly lit, just a single oil lamp burning low on a desk. The air carried a peculiar weight, thick with wax and polish, and something fainter. Mildew, perhaps. No windows, just 4 walls lined with old instruments and a single grand piano dominating the centre. No one else. Yet. I stepped inside, allowing the door to ease shut behind me with a soft click. My boots pressed against the well-worn rug that muffled all movement. I could hear only the ticking of the brass metronome on the piano lid. Tick, 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 and then a sound, very slight. A breath. "Who's there?" I asked, not timidly. No answer. Just a shift in the shadows behind the piano. I reached for the lamp and turned the wick higher. Light flared, pushing back the gloom and revealing a figure standing beside the piano's far edge, as still as a statue. A boy, dark-haired, pale, with the unmistakable tension of someone who doesn't want to be seen, yet somehow expects it. "Julius Fenwick," I said. His jaw clenched at the name. "I should be surprised," he muttered, "but I'm not." "I saw the photo," I replied. "You're not very good at staying out of them." His lips curled. "You noticed the mirror?" "Of course. I notice most things. For example, that your violin case is empty and your hands are trembling." He stepped out from behind the piano, shoulders rigid. "Because I shouldn't be here." "Neither should I said. "But here we are." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he said, "Lena is gone, isn't she?" "Yes." He let out a breath. "She didn't listen." "You told her to stop playing the sonata." "What sonata?" His gaze flicked to the piano. "It's called the Eurythmion Nocturne, supposedly composed by a madman during the final days of the Austrian court. It was never meant for performance, just study, theory. And yet Lena played it. She found a copy at Madame Rustova's. She was her pupil." I nodded slowly. The pieces were beginning to arrange themselves on the board. "After she played it," he continued, "she began to change, said she heard notes when no one else did, that some pieces spoke back. I thought she was trying to be dramatic. Then things started happening." "What kind of things?" He hesitated. "There was a girl who played cello in our ensemble," he said. "After Lena played the 3rd movement of the nocturne in rehearsal, that girl began waking up screaming, said she saw a man in black gloves watching her from the foot of her bed. Every night." My throat tightened. "A real man?" "No one ever saw him, but a week later she threw her cello into the Thames and left the school, refused to speak." "And Lena?" "She kept playing, secretly. I begged her to stop. Then, 3 nights ago, I heard her practicing again. That same section. Over and over. Let me guess," I said quietly. "The next day, she vanished." He nodded. I stepped closer to the piano. Its keys were yellowed, well worn. But there, on the far left, 3 black keys bore scratches, almost like tally marks. "Did she practice here?" "Yes." This was her assigned room. She called it her safe space. His voice cracked faintly. "I think it became her trap." I touched one of the scratched keys. It gave a low, mournful note. "She left me a message," I murmured. "In Madame Rustova's studio. She played too well." And here, they listen in silence. Julius flinched. "That phrase," he whispered. "She wrote it once in her journal. I thought it was poetry." "No?" I turned toward him. "It's a warning." The metronome ticked faster, as if responding to our voices. Tick, 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 tick. I turned back to it. The weight had shifted, sped up, yet neither of us had touched it. And then, from behind the piano came the faintest creak. We both froze. The floorboards beneath the piano sagged, just slightly, and I realized the pattern in the room's rug had a seam running straight under the instrument. I dropped to one knee. A trapdoor. Old. hidden beneath decades of polish and pride. Julius backed away. She used to talk about it, said she heard whispers under the floor sometimes when she played the sonata. I thought she meant echoes. No, I pulled the edge of the rug back, fingers working at the seam. There's something underneath. Julius hesitated, then dropped to the other side. Together we pried the panel open. A musty gust of air escaped, old dust and candle wax, and something sharper, like rosin left to rot. Beneath, a narrow staircase, stone steps, leading down into dark. And from that dark, music. 3 notes, played not on a violin, but on a piano. Soft, distant, deliberate. She's down there, I whispered. Or someone wanted us to think she was. Julius looked at me, face pale. You don't have to go. I always go, I said, because truth doesn't wait at the surface. It hides in the silence. And I intended to find it. Chapter 4. We descended the stone staircase in silence, our breaths shallow, swallowed by the air growing colder with each step. It wasn't just the chill of underground. It was the kind of cold that speaks of abandonment, of places forgotten by time, where footsteps haven't echoed in years, or shouldn't have. I led the way, holding the flickering oil lamp we'd taken from room 407, its flame too faint to light the full descent. The shadows clawed at the edges of its glow. Behind me, Julius moved stiffly, as though every creak beneath his shoes threatened to draw something out of the dark. The music had stopped the moment we'd opened the trapdoor. I hated that. I preferred danger when it's noisy. At the bottom, the stairs gave way to a narrow corridor of stone and plaster, damp walls running with beads of moisture. Someone had built this long ago, before the conservatory above, perhaps even before the neighbourhood, a forgotten root of something much older. Do you feel that? Julius whispered. Draft, I replied, and dread. One is real, the other is useful. He didn't smile. We passed a rusted lantern sconce, a collapsed wooden shelf, and then reached a heavy wooden door. Faded red paint clung to its edges like dried blood. Someone had once tried to bar it from the inside. The remnants of a broken latch still dangled from one corner. I reached for the handle. It turned easily. That was worse than if it had been locked. The room beyond was circular, wider than I expected. Its walls were lined with old soundproofing panels, the kind used in performance chambers, and in the centre, surrounded by candles that had long since burned out, was a piano. Not just any piano. An upright, black lacquered, with strange carvings etched into its legs, curling patterns, half musical notation, half vines. And on its keys, dust, except for 3. The same 3 notes we'd heard before. Their dust disturbed, recently played. Julius stayed near the door, his eyes locked on the instrument. I've never seen this room, he said. It isn't on the building plans, because someone didn't want it to be. I stepped forward slowly, eyeing the floor for traps. None. Just scuffed stone. My boot brushed against something. Paper. I crouched, lifting it gently. A sheet of music. Smudged. Torn at one corner. The Eurythmian Nocturne. The title was faint, almost erased, as if the parchment itself regretted carrying it. Only the first few bars were intact, but scribbled in the margins were words in the same careful hand as Lena's ciphered message. The final movement must not be played. Ever. They wait in the silence between the notes. More warnings. But to whom? Herself? Or someone she knew would follow? I scanned the room again. Another door, smaller, to the side. Metal. Locked with a sliding bolt. I stepped toward it, but Julius spoke. You hear it, don't you? I stopped. Hear what? The waiting. It's like the room is listening. I frowned, and then realized there was a hum, barely audible, a resonance beneath the threshold of sound. It wasn't coming from the piano. It was coming from the walls. Stand back, I whispered. I slid the bolt and opened the metal door. A narrow passageway led deeper still, but what struck me first wasn't what I saw. It was the air, different, perfumed, faintly floral, familiar. I stepped in, and the light from the lamp caught something glinting ahead. A silver bracelet. It lay on the stone floor, snapped open, one charm bent. A treble clef. Lena's. I had seen it around her wrist that day in the square. I knelt, picking it up. She was here, I murmured. Julius crouched beside me, eyes wide. Then where is she now? I turned slowly, eyes tracing the path forward. We followed it. The passage narrowed, walls growing tighter, until it opened into a second chamber, smaller, almost cell-like, and at the far end, a cot, and a violin, not abandoned, displayed. The violin rested upright, strings taut, bow suspended beside it like a blade, and behind it, on the stone wall, a series of photographs were pinned in precise rows, all of them of children, teenagers, each one holding an instrument, each one staring directly into the lens. Most of the photos were old, sepia-toned, some faded to near oblivion, but in the top right corner was a fresh one. Lena, in a red dress, the same one from the square. Her eyes were blank, expressionless. "Who took these?" Julius whispered. I didn't answer. I was looking at the small metal box mounted beneath the photos, a speaker. Hidden behind grating, a slow realization bloomed. This chamber was not only for keeping someone, it was for observing them, performing. "For how long?" I whispered. "How many students were brought down here?" Julius's voice cracked. "It's a ritual." I turned to him. He was pale, hands clenched. "My grandfather told me stories," he said. Back when he trained at the Prague Conservatory, he spoke of an elite society, musicologists, composers, patrons. They believed certain pieces held properties, that specific arrangements of sound could affect the mind, unlock parts of the psyche, or destroy it. I stared at the nocturne sheet in my hand. And the Eurythmian? It was their masterpiece, supposedly capable of opening the inner ear, not just hearing sound, but something beneath it, like music hidden in silence. "And Lena found it," I said grimly, "and someone wanted her to keep playing." Julius nodded slowly. "Or wanted to watch what happened when she did." From behind us, a soft click, the sound of the bolt sliding shut. I spun toward the passage. The door was closed. Then the lights, such as they were, dimmed. The speaker on the wall crackled to life, and a voice smooth and male filled the chamber. "Miss Holmes, Mr. Fenwick, you shouldn't be here." Julius stumbled back. "Who is that?" he hissed. The voice ignored him. "You are interfering with a performance in progress. Please return to your seats. The next movement begins shortly." Then the violin, lifted by an unseen hand, no, suspended by wire, jerked into playing position. The bow followed, and with a shuddering screech, it played the first 3 notes, the same ones we had heard before, the ones Lena had played. Then silence, and then a girl's voice. "Enola?" My heart stopped, faint, muffled, but real. "Help me." From behind the wall, from behind the photos, Lena, still alive, still waiting. And the next movement was about to begin, Chapter 5. The voice on the speaker faded, but its echo lingered. Every nerve in my body felt sharpened, tuned to an impossible frequency. Julius's eyes darted toward the wall of photographs as if they might come to life. But I wasn't looking at the faces anymore. I was listening. "Lena?" I called, voice low but clear. A pause. Then again, muffled and barely audible. "Enola, help me, please." The voice didn't come from the speaker. It came from behind it. I crossed the chamber, pressing my ear to the wall, faint breathing. A cough. Human. Alive. "She's there," I whispered, glancing back at Julius, who was frozen halfway between terror and disbelief. "We're not too late." "But how do we reach her?" he asked, moving beside me now, his eyes scanning the stone as if expecting it to peel open. Photographs. I murmured. "They aren't just for display. Look." I tapped the corner of one frame, the slightest metallic clink, hinged. I pulled it. The photograph of Lena swung outward, revealing not bare wall, but a slotted peephole, a viewing chamber. I removed 2 more photos, one after the other, revealing a narrow panel that ran horizontally behind them. "A hidden door," Julius breathed. "But how do we open it?" I stepped back, eyes flicking over the wall, the instruments, the violin still mounted upright in the centre like an idol. Then it clicked. The violin wasn't for listening. It was the key. I turned to Julius. "We need to play the next phrase." He blinked. "You want to what?" "Whoever's watching, controlling this, wants the sonata played. It's all performance to them, the ritual, the madness, the silence. But it must be layered in rules. Triggers." "You think playing the next bar will open the door?" "I don't know," I said, "but I'm quite certain not playing it won't do anything at all." He hesitated, glancing toward the floating violin and bow. "I can't." "Because you're afraid it will affect you?" I asked gently. He shook his head. "Because I already played it once. And I still hear it. In dreams, in breathing, sometimes in silence." That chilled me, but there was no time for fear. "Then I'll play it," I said. "I've heard it enough now." I stepped to the violin. It was suspended by thin wire and balanced awkwardly. I adjusted it, careful not to let it screech. The bow hung beside it. I took it, placed it in my right hand, and steadied the instrument beneath my chin. The next bar on the torn nocturne sheet hovered in my mind. I didn't know how I knew it. I just did. A whisper, already inside me. I drew the bow, 1 note, then another. The 3rd trembled. The 4th, click. A gear behind the wall shifted, stone against stone. Then silence. A hiss of stale air escaped as the hidden panel slid open. I lowered the violin. A narrow passage stretched beyond the wall, lit only by a series of dim amber bulbs embedded in the ceiling, like theatre footlights gone wrong. Julius stared. "I don't want to know why that worked," he said. "Then don't ask." We entered. The hallway was narrow, the air colder. It curved slightly, then opened into a chamber lined with thick glass. And behind the glass, cells. There were 3. 2 were empty. The 3rd, Lena. She sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide. Her red dress was torn at the sleeve, and her fingers clutched something in her lap. She looked up. Our eyes met. A second passed. Then she screamed, "It's a trap! He's watching! He never left!" A mechanical buzz cut her off. A shutter slammed down between us with a crack of steel. I lunged forward. "Lena!" The chamber darkened. A new voice, live now, not through a speaker. It came from the far end of the hallway, where a shadow detached itself from the wall and stepped into view. A man in a black suit, older, lean, with gloves so dark they swallowed the light. He was real. "Miss Holmes," he said calmly, "you've made quite the entrance." Julius stepped beside me, his breath catching. "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping myself between him and the door. He ignored me. "You broke the rules," he said. "The sonata is not to be interrupted. Observation must remain. Pure." "Let her go," I said. "She's the key," he replied. "Her mind absorbs it like no one before. The eurythmion requires a listener and a vessel. She is both. You nearly ruined the performance." "I'll ruin more than that," I growled, shifting my stance. "Who are you? A composer? A conductor? A collector of suffering?" "I," he said, "am the archivist." He gestured behind him, toward a corridor I hadn't seen, lined with doors, each marked with a musical note. "This is not about cruelty. It's about evolution. Human minds are instruments. Most are dull. But hers, like yours perhaps, resonate. You hear more than others. You see more. What if that could be refined? You lock children in cells. He gave a thin smile. Art requires sacrifice. No, I said coldly. Control does. From behind the steel shutter, Lena's voice cracked through. He made me listen to others, play for them, watch their eyes go empty. He records us. The man moved, too fast. He reached for something at his side. I was faster. With one clean motion, I threw the violin bow like a dagger, blunt, but sharp enough to distract. He flinched. Julius lunged and tackled him. I ran to the shutter. It was controlled by a lever beside the door, locked by a steel latch, but this was a place of performance, and I knew performance required one thing above all timing. I found a second lever just beneath the baseboard, hidden. I pulled. The shutter groaned, then rose. Lena fell forward into my arms, shaking. I couldn't stop it, she sobbed. He made me listen, made me watch the others vanish. You're safe now, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Behind me, Julius had the archivist pinned, barely. The man struggled, muttering something about unfinished movements and final harmonies. He sounded less like a villain and more like a conductor whose orchestra had walked out. I turned to him. You'll answer to more than us. He laughed, soft and sickly. You think I'm alone in this? He didn't elaborate. But he didn't need to, because somewhere behind us, deep in the hall of doors, a new melody began, played by a violin I couldn't see, slow, sad, and not entirely human. Chapter 6. The violin music drifted down the corridor like a poison-laced perfume, slow, deliberate and wrong. Lena flinched at each note. Her hands clutched at my sleeve, knuckles pale. Julius remained kneeling atop the archivist, who had stopped struggling. His eyes, sharp before, now glazed over like he was listening to something distant, something far away yet inside his own skull. He's hearing it, I muttered, watching the twitch of his jaw, the subtle tremble in his hands. The next movement, Lena whispered. It's begun. Julius looked up. What happens if it finishes? Lena didn't answer. Her expression did. I rose to my feet, scanning the hallway of doors behind the archivist. Each was etched with a different musical notation, a clef, a cluster of notes, a dynamic mark. And just barely, from one of them, the fourth door on the left, came the music. But no footsteps, no voice, no one was playing. Stay here, I said, gently pushing Lena back. Julius, if he so much as twitches, strike him with something heavy. Julius nodded grimly and reached for a loose iron rod beside the shutter mechanism. I moved forward. The music thickened with every step, not louder, denser, like sound pressing against the bones of the corridor. I passed the first door, silent. The second, locked. The third had scorch marks along its hinges. Then the fourth. I paused. The music bled through the seam beneath the door. And the doorknob was turning, slowly, of its own accord. I reached for the lockpick hidden in my boot, not to use but to listen, pressed the tip to the wood and brought the hilt to my ear. A faint vibration. A second violin had joined the first. A duet. No fingers. No strings attached. Still, it played. I opened the door. The room was round, like the others, and lined with mirrors. Not glass, polished metal, warped and smoky, reflecting shadows more than shapes, and in the centre, two violins, suspended by threads of fine wire, dancing as they played themselves in the air. Their bows moved with perfect synchronicity. Below them, a chair, empty, and behind it, a figure in the shadows. I stepped forward slowly. The figure did not move, but I could hear breathing, shallow, not quite human, not quite alive. I took one more step. The mirrors around me flickered. My reflection twisted, not just delayed, altered. My face, pale, hollow-eyed, as if hearing the music were drawing the colour from me. The violin notes sharpened. I stumbled. Then the voice returned, not spoken aloud but vibrating through the very air. Do not interrupt. She's nearly ready. I gritted my teeth. Who is? Silence. The violins played on. I turned to the shadow behind the chair. Is it you? I said aloud. The true conductor. The shape moved, not with footsteps, but like smoke curling upward from a dying candle. A tall figure cloaked in black, with a veil of gauze obscuring their face. She, lifted one hand and the violin stopped, abrupt, as if a blade had sliced through the final note. I could breathe again, and the room exhaled. Why Lena? I asked. Why children? Why all this? The figure tilted its head. When it spoke, it was through the metal, through the room. A voice of vibration more than tone. We do not choose them. They hear us. They come. No, you lured them, with music, with false mentors, with promises, with truth. The voice sharpened. We offer hearing beyond sound, sight beyond light. Most break. One did not. I knew who. Lena, I whispered. She resisted. The figure took a step forward. The mirrors behind me darkened. She opened the gate, but would not let us in. My breath caught. You need her to finish the sonata. We need her to continue it. The wires holding the violins snapped one by one, the instruments dropping into the chair with unnatural grace. The figure stepped aside. An invitation. Play. I backed away. Not a chance. The mirrors pulsed with black veins of shadow. Then another will, and I saw it. Lena, behind the figure, no longer in the hallway, no longer behind me. Standing just beyond the veil, her face expressionless, eyes glassy. No, I whispered. She's still herself. She fought you. She is listening. The violins lifted, but not on wires. By her hands, she reached for the bow. No. I lunged forward, but the floor shifted beneath me, slick with something that wasn't water. I slipped. A hand caught mine. Julius. He pulled me back with a grunt of effort. We heard her scream. The archivist tried to stop us. Bloody hell, what is that? Get her out, I shouted. She's trying to play. She's not herself. Lena stepped forward, one violin in hand. She raised it to her chin, but her fingers shook. Something inside her still resisted. I locked eyes with her. Lena, listen to me, not them. The shadows around the figure writhed. Play, the voice commanded. She looked down at the strings, then at me. Her lips trembled, and she whispered, Stop me. She raised the bow. I did the only thing I could. I screamed. Not a word, not a sound, just noise, a burst of raw, human chaos. It cut through the room like a dagger. Lena's bow froze mid-air. The mirrors cracked. The figure shrieked, not in pain, but in discord. The notes collapsed into noise. Julius hurled a chair into the nearest mirror. Glass and metal splintered in a spray of sparks. The floor beneath us lurched again. The room was dying. And still, Lena stood frozen. I ran to her, pulled the violin from her hand. Her knees buckled and she sagged into me. Is it over? She gasped. Not yet, I said, but we're not listening anymore. I looked back. The figure had disappeared. Only the chair remained. And the violins lay cracked and silent on the floor. The music had stopped. But somewhere, in the walls, the mirrors, the stones, something still listened. Chapter 7. We did not speak for a long moment, not as the mirrors cracked along their seams, not as the violins split down their ribs and spilled silence onto the stone floor, not as the archive seemed to inhale one final time and then fall still, like a theatre gone dark between acts. Lena sagged against my shoulder. Her breath was shallow, her skin damp with sweat not of exertion, but of something far colder, the kind one wakes from, a nightmare, unfinished. Julius leaned against the shattered frame of the doorway, his hands bloodied from where the mirror had sliced him, his knuckles white from gripping the chair he'd thrown. His eyes scanned every corner of the corridor as though expecting the veiled figure to return from the cracks in the floor. He would not. Not like that. but the shadow of him still lingered. In Lena's silence, in the way the walls no longer vibrated with unnatural resonance, but still remembered it. "We need to leave," I said. Lena's lips barely moved. "They're not gone." "I know. Because what we'd just destroyed wasn't the root. It was only the chamber. The archive was a recording, a ritual, a stage. But someone, flesh and blood, had built it, maintained it, funded it. And that meant someone above ground still pulled strings. And not the musical kind. We moved quickly now, back through the hall of sealed doors. The archivist was gone, vanished, leaving behind nothing but a single glove, neatly folded on the ground beside the shattered violin Lena had once played. Julius picked it up. "Empty," he muttered, like he evaporated. "Or was called away," I said darkly, "by something louder than us." We climbed the narrow stairway back toward room 407, guiding Lena between us. The air grew warmer the higher we climbed. With every step, the weight of the chamber below faded, replaced by the creaks and groans of the ordinary old building. Familiar sounds, no longer orchestrated. The trapdoor opened easily. The music room above had not changed, but something had. A faint scent lingered in the air, tobacco and dust, and on the piano lid, placed deliberately in the centre, a sealed envelope, with one word inked on the front, in a hand I did not recognize. Holmes. I stiffened. Julius exchanged a glance with me but said nothing. I broke the wax seal. Inside, a single sheet of parchment. Thick, heavy. The ink had been pressed in, not simply written. You've seen the surface, heard a whisper of the deeper score. But this movement is not yours to finish. You disrupted a study in progress. And though the archivist failed in containment, others will take his place. There are more songs to play. Stay out of them, Miss Holmes. Or next time, we'll compose a requiem just for you. No name, but stamped at the bottom in black wax, a conductor's baton crossed with a tuning fork. I didn't show Lena the letter. Her hands were shaking again. Instead, I folded it, slipped it into my coat, and turned toward the window. The frost had melted from the panes. Dawn was breaking. The fog had thinned. A new day waited, and we needed to be far away from here when it began. We exited through the side gate of the conservatory. Julius helped Lena into a hired carriage he'd flagged on Cavendish Street. She said little. She hadn't asked to be saved, only to be stopped. But sometimes those two things are closer than people think. She looked at me before the door closed. "Do you hear it?" she asked softly. I paused. "What?" She tilted her head. "That silence. It's too quiet, like something holding its breath." I didn't lie. "Yes," I said, "I hear it." She gave the smallest nod. And then she was gone, the wheels of the carriage clicking away like a metronome receding into the fog. Julius stood beside me. "You're not going to leave this alone, are you?" he asked. "No," I said. "Are you?" He gave a sad smile. "No." We walked. It was too dangerous to speak openly yet. Too many ears in London, not all of them attached to faces. We paused beneath a clock tower near Paddington. The street was still quiet. Only a newsboy cried the day's headlines. Disappearance at conservatory brushed aside. Headmaster resigns over mismanagement of practice rooms. I snorted. That didn't take long. "Spin and silence," Julius said. "They've done this before. They'll do it again, unless we stop them. But how? We had no names, no true identities, only symbols, fragments of music, a coded sonata, and a cult, or was it a society, that believed sound could unlock the mind. "Do you think Lena will ever recover?" Julius asked. I considered that. She resisted, I said, even when it was inside her, even when it tried to use her hands. "She's strong, yes, and not the only one." I reached into my coat pocket and drew out Lena's broken bracelet. The treble clef charm was dented, but still intact. I'd find a way to return it, or wear it, myself. That night, I sat by the hearth at my lodgings on Baker Street. I did not knit. I did not pace. I listened. To the city. To its breathing. To the hum beneath its rhythm. Not the unnatural resonance of the archive, but something real, honest, human, but even so. When the wind slipped through the chimney just before midnight, it carried a sound that did not belong. 3 notes, played high, almost like a warning, almost like a signature. The same 3 notes Lena had played. The same 3 that had opened the hidden door. The same 3 that still echoed somewhere, deep within the vaults of the society, or whatever name they used in the daylight. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm still listening." Chapter 8. It had been 3 days since Lena was freed from the archive beneath the conservatory. 3 days of silence. The kind not found in empty rooms or quiet libraries, but the kind that stretches between breaths when you're waiting for something to start again. I had kept to my flat, poring over notes, scribbled clues, and the letter with the black wax seal now locked in the hidden drawer of my writing desk. The one signed not with a name, but a baton crossed with a tuning fork, an emblem of power masquerading as art. I'd spent hours replaying everything, Lena's trance, the figure in the mirrored room, the music that seemed to summon something through sound. But despite the weight of all I'd seen, there remained no name, no face, no proper trail, just a pattern, a melody. Until this morning, it began with a note slipped beneath my door. No wax, no signature, just a folded paper and a single line. The recital begins at dusk, St. Ives Church. All prodigies welcome. I read it once, then again. The name was familiar. Not because I'd been there. St. Ives Church was a crumbling stone relic on the edge of the city, half swallowed by ivy and forgotten by all but birds, but because I'd heard it whispered once in Madame Roustova's studio. An offhand comment to Lena, "If you wish to be heard by them, St. Ives is where the true audience waits." I'd assumed it metaphorical. I should have known better. By 5 o'clock, I stood outside the gates of the ruined chapel. The spire was cracked, the stained glass windows missing more colour than they held, and moss had crept up the buttresses like time reclaiming a debt. But someone had lit lanterns along the path, and music, live, soft, unmistakably human, drifted from inside. Violin, flute, even a cello, practice scales, overlapping and echoing in minor keys. I stepped inside. The chapel had been stripped of pews. In their place, rows of chairs in semicircles, as if for an audience who preferred to face inward. An altar had been replaced by a platform, and on it a child, no more than 13, seated, pale, dressed in a grey uniform with no markings. She played the violin, flawlessly, emotionlessly, surrounded by men and women, silent, statuesque, who watched her not as admirers, but as technicians. They didn't clap when she finished. They nodded, as if measuring resonance. I turned. Julius was at the edge of the doorway, his coat dusted with snow. He met my eyes. "They found another one," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "They grew another one." He stepped beside me. "We can't stop it tonight, not like this." "I know, but we can learn." And so we did. We walked the edges of the chapel unnoticed, moving through the shadows, observing. They called themselves patrons. They spoke in quiet circles. His hand failed, but the blueprint remains. She decoded the 4th movement without assistance. The society in Vienna sends their congratulations. Not a single name was spoken, but there were phrases, patterns, and then, on a music stand, open and marked, Eurythmion Nocturne, 5th movement draft. My blood ran cold. "They're still writing it," I whispered. "No," Julius said beside me. "They're finishing it." It wasn't just a piece anymore. It was an ongoing construction, a symphony of psychological tuning, a weapon. And these children, these prodigies, were being shaped into its instruments. Suddenly, one of the silent watchers turned. A woman, tall, narrow, with a silver pin on her cloak shaped like a harp-string, pulled taut. Her gaze met mine. Not surprise. Recognition. I didn't flinch. I stepped forward. "Is this the part," I asked evenly, "where you invite me to join?" A flicker of a smile. "No," she said. "You were never meant to join. Because I resist? Because you compose your own music, and those who do." She gestured toward the child on the platform. "Are too unpredictable." I nodded once. "And yet you invited me. To see what you would do with the invitation." "I suppose I failed your test?" Her smile vanished. "You passed it, Miss Holmes." Then quieter. "But you are still a problem." Julia stepped forward beside me. "She's more than that. She's a warning." The woman turned. "So be it," she said. Then walked away. The music resumed. We left at dusk's final breath. Snow fell softly as we walked back through the iron gates of St. Ives. "Do you think they'll move the project now?" Julius asked. "Find another hidden chamber, another Lena?" "They won't stop," I replied. "But they'll hide deeper. Use different names, different instruments." "So what do we do?" I looked up at the sky. London hummed in the distance, unaware of the undercurrent beneath its cobblestones and concert halls. "I study the score," I said, "and rewrite the ending." That night, I returned to my flat and pulled the letter from its hiding place. The baton, the tuning fork, the warning. I placed it beside the marked page I'd taken from the archive, a fragment of the fifth movement, riddled with symbols. I studied the patterns, the intervals, the spaces between notes, there, faintly, coded among the rests and pauses, not in ink, but in spacing. The eye sees what the ear denies, a message, hidden in music, from someone inside. I exhaled, then smiled, because they were still watching me, still listening, but now I was listening back. Chapter 9. Night pressed against my window like a held breath. The fragment of the fifth movement lay flat on my desk, illuminated by a single candle. The coded phrase, "The eye sees what the ear denies," glowed faintly in the dim light, as though inviting me to plunge deeper into a labyrinth only the society understood. I leaned back, letting my thoughts settle into their natural order. Clues first, questions next, patterns last. The society had not killed Lena. They had shaped her, tested her, and then prepared another stage entirely. The recital at St. Ives had not been a performance. It had been a recruitment ground, a demonstration, a warning, but more importantly, an opportunity. Someone inside the society wanted me to find this message. The eye sees what the ear denies. A contradiction, a clue, a direction. I rose, paced the length of the room, and stopped at my bookcase. My fingers brushed across the spine of an atlas, a botany journal, then paused at a thin volume, Symbols in Early European Music. Page 112. A section about negative spacing, messages hidden not in sounds, but the pauses between them, in the architecture around them, in visual code disguised as sheet music. I compared the fragment beside me. Most would see rests, empty beats, silence. I saw a map disguised as notation, lines intersecting rests, rests aligned with symbols, symbols aligned with something else entirely. Not coordinates, not instructions, something older. I grabbed a pencil, connected the rests with straight lines. A shape emerged, a stone archway, a specific one. My breath hitched. I knew that archway. It belonged to the old London Conservatory archive, the original building abandoned decades ago when the newer one was built. I had passed it hundreds of times, a soot-stained ruin hidden behind iron railings and ivy. Everyone said it was structurally unsound, haunted with drafts and rats. But they were wrong. It had been waiting, listening. By dawn, Julius stood beside me at the gate of the old conservatory ruins. He wore a thick coat and carried a lamp. "You're sure about this?" he asked, eyeing the cracked stone facade. The society won't return to a place already linked to them. Unless it was never linked publicly, I replied, and the music fragment doesn't lie. He frowned. I'm coming only because you'd go alone otherwise. I would, I said, and thank you. He softened. For Lena. For all of them. We squeezed through a gap in the iron bars. Frost coated the grass and the path that wound toward the derelict entrance. The main doors hung askew, one barely attached to its hinge. Inside, the darkness was thick, not dead, just watching. Julius raised the lamp, revealing a foyer of collapsed beams and broken plaster. Sheet music fragments clung to the floorboards like wilted leaves. Where do we start? He asked. Where the rest lead. We moved deeper, turning down a hallway lined with cracked mirrors and empty instrument hooks. The silence was heavy, the kind that carried memory rather than emptiness. I traced the wall with my fingertips until I found it. A stone arch identical to the shape hidden in the nocturne fragment, and beneath it, a symbol carved faintly into the floor, the same crossed baton and tuning fork from the society's warning. This is the place, I whispered. Julius knelt, brushing dust aside. There's something here. Before he could finish, the symbol clicked. A stone tile shifted. A hidden door slid open, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. Of course. Music societies always hide their deepest secrets below the surface. We descended, the lamp flickering against damp stone walls. The air smelled of old parchment and cold metal. At the bottom lay a small stone chamber with shelves built into the walls, and on them, not instruments, not recordings, books, hundreds of them, bound in black leather, each marked with a gold emblem, either the baton and tuning fork or a single musical note. Julius lifted one. Case file. Subject E14. He flipped a few pages, paling. These are records of children, students, everyone they ever used. And more, I said, and pulling another volume. On the cover, Eurythmian Project, Founder's Notes. Inside were diagrams, experiments, observations on sound frequencies and their effects on cognition, maps of ancient amphitheatres, and in the centre, almost reverently displayed, a photograph, 4 adults. One of them was the archivist, another, the woman from St. Ives, and the third, my breath caught, a man with silver hair and a quiet gaze, a conductor's baton in his hand, and beside him, a woman, my mother, Enola Holmes. My heart slammed against my ribs. Julius saw my face. What is it? I handed him the photograph. He stared, then looked up at me. Your mother worked with them? No, I said immediately. She infiltrated them. She must have. I flipped the photo over, there in faint pencil. Not all music is meant to be heard. Some must be unmade. E.H. My throat tightened. The society hadn't sent me that coded message. My mother had. Before leaving, before disappearing, before I ever knew any of this existed, she had been fighting them long before I stumbled into their melody. Julius spoke softly. Enola, if your mother was involved at this level, she isn't dead, I whispered. She didn't vanish. She's still fighting them. A sound echoed through the chamber, soft, slow. 3 familiar notes. Julius tensed. They followed us. No, said, turning toward the sound. That's not them. We followed the 3 notes down a second corridor leading deeper underground. Ahead, faint light flickered. A small room opened before us, empty except for a single music stand and a stack of letters held down by a stone. Julius lifted the top letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Enola Holmes. For you, Julius said, handing it to me. My fingers trembled as I opened it. If you have found this place, then they know you exist. You are not safe, but you are ready. The final movement is almost complete. Destroy it before they use it. And remember, Silence is never empty. My mother was alive. She knew the society's secrets, and she wanted me to finish what she began. I folded the letter carefully, then looked at Julius. They want to complete the Eurythmion, I said, but we'll reach it first. And end it. End it, I repeated firmly. As we turned back toward the stairs, the 3 notes sounded again. But this time, they weren't a warning. They were an invitation. The next movement had begun. And we were no longer simply listeners. We were the counter-melody. Chapter 10. It is one thing to discover a secret. It is another to know it's watching you back. The coded message in my mother's handwriting burned behind my eyes. Destroy it before they use it. The it was the Eurythmion Nocturne. But where it was being completed, and by whom, was still veiled in orchestrated silence. Until now, Julius and I returned to Baker Street with a box of copied documents from the old conservatory archive. Notes, performance records, letters between shadowy benefactors, and pages from the 5th movement draft. We spread them across my floor like a shattered mirror. Each fragment glinted with implication. But one, just one, finally reflected something whole. A letter addressed to Monsieur Laurent, patron of the Paris Harmonic Society subject, Eurythmion completion timeline from CC. There was no full name, but the signature, etched in crimson ink, flourished, deliberate. CC, I'd seen it once before, on a newspaper article pinned to Madame Rustova's music room wall months ago, a review. Maestro Cléon Carville to conduct Winter Gala at the Imperial Opera House, a night of silence and sound. Cléon Carville, a conductor so reclusive that critics called him the phantom tuner. His performances were scarce, his rehearsals done in locked halls, and his pupils, when they emerged, spoke in whispers about strange disciplines, hours of stillness, even rehearsing without sound. At the time, I thought it eccentricity. Now I knew it was design. We know who's finishing the Nocturne, I told Julius, and where. Julius narrowed his eyes. Imperial Opera House? Exactly, they're calling it the Winter Gala, but it's the final performance. That's where the Eurythmion will debut. And if they succeed, they won't need sound to control minds, just resonance. 3 nights later, London shimmered beneath a curtain of frost. The opera house stood like a jewel wrapped in snow, a grand spire of mirrored windows and stone lions, with footmen ushering in the wealthiest patrons of Europe. We didn't enter through the front. Julius and I crept through the alley behind the dressing rooms. The building had once suffered a fire. Most thought it cosmetic, but according to the blueprints I found, a second sub-basement had been added afterward and never reported. That's where they would tune the final movement. We found the hidden service lift behind a rotted velvet curtain. It groaned as we descended. Below, a corridor lined with rehearsal chambers, but none in use, except one. Chamber D. The plaque had no number, but from within came that sound. The Nocturne. Still incomplete, still growing, each phrase sharper, hungrier. I stepped forward, hand hovering above the door. Inside could be the society's core, or a trap, or both. I pushed it open. The chamber was not a rehearsal room. It was a vault, circular, walls lined with silver-tuned panels. A platform in the centre, raised a step, and upon it, a single grand piano, keys gleaming like teeth, and beside it, Maestro Cléon Carville. Tall, thin, dressed in a black tailcoat stitched with faint red thread. He did not turn as we entered. He simply said, "You've arrived too early." His voice was low, even, chilling. "I make a habit of that," I replied. Carville tapped a key. A note rang out, clear, perfect. Lena would have crumpled. But I didn't flinch. "Your mother waited until the final note," he said. "You, however, are more impatient." I stepped closer. "Where is she?" He paused. Then, "She fled before the finale, but not before playing it." I froze. "You're lying." "No. She played it for me. Once, and that is why she will never forget it. His fingers hovered over the keys. The eurythmion is not about music. It is about control. Every human mind vibrates. Every emotion is a pitch. We have merely tuned it. You're not composing. You're colonizing the human soul. And you would stop us? He gestured to the piano. You cannot destroy it. Not with fire. Not with silence. It lives now in the minds of hundreds, each trained to carry a measure. I stared at the instrument. There was no score, no paper, because the final movement had been memorized. He saw the realization in my eyes. Yes, he said, the society no longer needs the written sonata. The music lives in its players. And tonight, when the orchestra performs, they'll infect everyone, I finished. Julius stepped forward. We destroy the players. The movement dies. No, I whispered. We need a counter-frequency, a dissonance, a disruption, something that breaks the harmonic chain. Carville smiled faintly. Your mother tried. She failed. I'm not her. Before he could respond, I raised the tuning fork I'd stolen from the archive vault. Then I struck it. Hard. A piercing, unpitched frequency split the air, so high it barely registered in sound. But the room reacted. The panels rippled, the piano hissed. Carville stumbled back. I grabbed the edge of the platform and shouted, Julius, now! He swung a thick conductor's baton, the original from the archive, and struck the side of the piano. The sound that came out was not musical, it was wrong. Beautifully, violently wrong. The panels cracked, the vault hummed like a collapsing lung. Carville screamed, not in pain but rage, hands over his ears. Stop it, you'll undo the tuning. Exactly, I growled. I struck the fork again, and the walls buckled. Then, silence. Not empty, final. Carville collapsed, unconscious. The piano strings snapped, the air settled, and the sonata was no longer singing. It had been detuned. Later, as we emerged into the empty alley behind the opera house, Julius looked at me and said, Do you think it's over? No, I replied, but now they'll need to start from nothing. He nodded. That gives us time. And time, I said, is a better composer than any of them. Chapter 11. Snow returned to London in flurries by morning. It drifted across the rooftops like powdered chalk on a score sheet, dusting the city in a quiet stillness. Yet beneath the surface of that hush, I could feel it, the ripples, the disturbance. Something had broken the pattern. We had not destroyed the society. That much I knew. But we had done what they feared most. We had made them start over. Maestro Cléon Carville was gone. By the time Scotland Yard arrived at the Opera House in response to the collapse in the sub-basement, all that remained of Chamber D was scorched wiring, warped steel, and the remnants of a grand piano twisted like a broken ribcage. There were no bodies, no trace of the man who had conducted minds like instruments. But I didn't need a body to know he was alive. The true players in the society always vanish between movements. They retreat, they regroup, and they compose something new. But this time they had miscalculated, because this time they had provoked me. Julius and I returned to Baker Street in the hours before dawn. He slumped into the armchair by the fire, nursing a bandage around his palm. When this began, he murmured, I thought it was about one girl and a missing violin. I poured him tea. Most truths begin with small sounds, I said. Then build. And what now? He asked. We cracked their instrument. What happens when they rewrite it? I didn't answer at once. Instead, I unfolded my mother's letter again. Destroy it before they use it. We had done that, but another line now stood out more than before. Silence is never empty. It had never been about stopping a single sonata. It was about understanding the silence that followed, because that's where they would hide next. In gaps, in institutions no one questioned, in symphonies too prestigious to suspect. And if they no longer needed physical scores to transmit influence, if they had turned to memory, training, and encoded performance, Then the society didn't need music halls anymore. They needed people. That afternoon, I visited Lena. She had been moved to a quiet cottage in the Cotswolds under the protection of a friend of my mother's, an herbalist who believed in healing not just the body, but the nervous system that weaves sound and memory together. Lena greeted me at the door. She looked better, no longer shadowed by that veil of trembling silence. Her eyes were clearer, her movement steady, but a sliver of that music still clung to her, like the scent of smoke after fire. I remember almost all of it now, she told me as we walked her garden. The fifth movement, what they were trying to do. Do you remember how they chose you? I asked. She nodded slowly. A competition at the conservatory, but it wasn't about talent, it was about sensitivity. They weren't testing who played best, they were testing who heard things they weren't supposed to. And you did? She gave a bitter smile. Unfortunately. But you also resisted. That's what matters. She glanced at me. Will they come again? I didn't lie. Yes. She didn't flinch. Then you'd best teach me how to fight. That evening, I returned to my desk with renewed clarity. Julia sat across from me, drawing out patterns from the scattered records we'd copied from the old archive. Names, dates, venues, instruments. Look at this, he said, tapping one page. It was a list of performers, students who had disappeared over the past 12 years. Some had returned. Most hadn't. But next to each name was a 3-letter code, a designation. Subjects, I whispered. They were cataloguing them like experiments, which means they must have kept track of success rates, Julia said, and failures. I leaned over him. What's the highest failure cluster? He pointed. Group code VK5. All subjects had been withdrawn mid-program. No public explanation, but beside one of them a short note. Prolonged dissonance. Subject rejected harmonic sync. Possible counter-harmonic response embedded subconsciously. I blinked. This wasn't a failure, I said. This was a threat. They produced a subject who could resist the influence entirely. Or worse, reverse it. Julius caught on immediately. You think this subject could undo the eurythmion from inside? Or mirror it, cancel it? We scanned the entry. Name, Aurelia Voss, former violinist. Expelled from the Royal Conservatoire after a mental breakdown. No further records. Last known location, Vienna. Julius sat back, eyes wide. If we find... Her. She may be the last uncorrupted counterfrequency, I said. The society failed to control her. That's why they buried the record. He rose to his feet. Then we go to Vienna. I nodded once, and added quietly, but we don't go as detectives. He looked puzzled. We go as musicians. Because the society had eyes everywhere, but they only listened for silence. They never expected a response. That night, before I closed my journal, I wrote one final line. The eurythmion lives in the memory of its players, but so does its undoing. And if silence can be weaponized, so can a single note of defiance. Chapter 12, Vienna greeted us with silence, not the hush of snow or early morning mist, but a silence engineered, like soundproof walls. The air held something brittle beneath its beauty. The city glittered with music halls, universities, and copper-domed theatres. Yet beneath it all lay the pulse of something hidden, a rhythm too precise to be natural. The society had roots here, ancient ones. This was their birthplace, and perhaps their burial ground. Julius and I arrived posing as a brother-sister musical duo, violin and piano. Our letters of introduction were forged, but effective enough to gain us an invitation to a conservatory recital in the outskirts of the city. That was our key in. We weren't looking for an audience. We were looking for Aurelia Voss. The conservatory was smaller than I expected. Wood-panelled walls, draughty corridors, instruments that bore signs of being played more than preserved. But the recital was polished, clean, almost too perfect. The girl on stage played a violin solo that should have felt alive, but something in the phrasing made it sterile, like her fingers were reciting commands instead of emotions. Julius leaned toward me. "Hear that?" he whispered. "Yes. Eurythmion phrasing, watered down, but it's there." The society was testing new cadences, disguised under classical progressions, slipping them into recitals like venom in wine. They were rebuilding the sonata, and they were using students again. After the recital, we slipped away from the reception and found the staff records. Julius, ever nimble with locks, opened the faculty drawer. We scanned quickly, and then I saw it. Aurelia Voss, former student, dismissed, no forwarding address. But next to the entry, a note scribbled hastily in the margin, "Ask Frau Gerda, chapel caretaking rotation." Gerda, not a professor, a cleaner. It took us 2 hours to find her, sweeping floors in the stone chapel behind the school. She was old, sharp-eyed, and wary of strangers. But when I showed her Aurelia's name, her gaze changed. "You're not the first to ask," she said in a low voice, her German-tinted English clipped and precise. "Who else?" I asked. "Men in coats with waxy hands and too many questions." They left, unsettled. Julius stepped forward. "Do you know where she is?" "She plays in the crypt," Gerda said. "Beneath the chapel, only after midnight, only when the wind howls." She narrowed her eyes. "If she plays for you, be prepared to hear more than you came for." We waited. At midnight the wind rose, and so did the music. Not sweet, not practiced, but raw, unfiltered, and dissonant. It scratched at the walls like a memory trying to be born. I followed it down the candlelit stairwell behind the altar, past old tombs and dust-coated hymnals, until we reached a chamber where the air hummed in anticipation. And there she was, Aurelia Voss, older now, gaunt, wrapped in layers of black fabric like silk armour. Her eyes were not mad, but they were deeper than sound. She didn't stop playing when she saw us. She watched us through the music, and I knew then, she had known we were coming. When she finished, silence fell like a curtain. She stood. "You've come to end them." "Yes," I said. Her voice was low, dry but steady. "Good. I've been waiting." She walked to a wooden chest in the corner and opened it. Inside was a single object. The original Eurythmion manuscript, written in a hand notated with symbols and rest too precise to be academic. It was no longer legend. It was real. "You're the only one left who can understand it," I said. "No," she replied. "I'm the only one left who can reverse it." She unrolled a second scroll. It was the counter-movement, composed by her own hand, dissonant, beautiful, chaotic. "A harmony doesn't defeat the Eurythmion," Aurelia said. "Only its opposite does. And if it's played?" She looked at me, and for the first time there was warmth in her voice. "Then silence will be ours again, not theirs." 3 days later, the society reconvened in Vienna's oldest concert hall. Disguised as a private gala, it was to be their quiet return. The unveiling of a newly revised Eurythmion theme under the name Symphony for the Subconscious. They never saw us arrive. Aurelia entered in disguise. I took my seat in the rear. Julius waited by the lights, and when the conductor lifted his hand, baton poised, Aurelia played first. Not their melody, hers. The counterscore exploded into the hall like shattered glass. Dissonance danced with order. Sound twisted into silence. The orchestra froze. The conductor faltered. The audience listened, and something in their eyes shifted, like waking from a dream or a spell. Julius killed the lights. I moved fast, toward the conductor's stand, toward the hidden society members seated in the balconies. And by the time they understood what had happened, it was too late. The Eurythmion spell was broken, its grip shattered by its own reflection. Later, as I stood on the rooftop of the opera house and watched the city breathe again, Aurelia joined me. She looked younger already, freer. "They'll try again," she said. "Yes," I replied. "But next time, they'll know. We're listening." She placed the original manuscript into my hands. "You'll know when to burn it." I nodded, because now I understood. The power of music was not in the notes, but in who controlled the silence between them. End of chapter 12. All key mysteries are resolved. Lena was rescued. The Society's purpose and method were uncovered. The Eurythmian nocturne was neutralized. Enola discovered her mother's secret role and continued her legacy. A counterforce, Aurelia and Enola, now exists. The Society is disrupted, not destroyed, leaving intelligent tension open but narratively satisfying. Final line. The power of music was not in the notes, but in who controlled the silence between them. Chapter 13. Some victories sound like silence, not the quiet of peace but of retreat, when the enemy vanishes between shadows, and you're left in the stillness, wondering if the storm has passed or simply changed form. The Society had lost its symphony, but its silence was growing again. We remained in Vienna for 3 more days after the gala, long enough to confirm that the Eurythmian counter-movement had spread, subtly, invisibly, through those who had heard Aurelia's performance. Some attendees forgot the melody entirely. Others recalled it differently each time they tried to explain it. Perfect disruption. Aurelia had done what no one else could. She fractured the structure of the Society's music from the inside, introducing variability into a system built on control. And yet I still couldn't sleep. It was the letter from my mother. I read it nightly. "Silence is never empty." That line haunted me, because I knew what she meant now. The Society didn't vanish. They waited. They restructured. They tuned new players. And they no longer needed concert halls. They had moved into the minds of politicians, advisors, philosophers, anyone who shaped the way people think. The music had evolved into method. They didn't need the Eurythmion to control the world. They needed obedience to a single frequency of thought. That was far harder to detect, and far more dangerous. Julius and I walked the Schönbrunn Palace gardens in silence. He had been quiet since the gala, reflective, but not defeated. "They'll never stop, will they?" he asked at last. "No," I said. "But now we know the rules of their composition." He looked over. "And ours?" I smiled faintly. "Improvisation." He laughed softly. "They'll hate that." Good. We sat beneath a bare-limbed linden tree, watching the wind twist between its branches. "I keep thinking about Lena," he said. "And the others. How many are still out there, affected, without knowing?" "Too many," I answered. "But we can find them." He looked at me seriously now. "We don't need to destroy the Society," he said. "We just need to detune it, one person at a time." I nodded. "We become the dissonance." Aurelia left Vienna the next day. She did not say where she was going, only that it was a place where the wind still carried the truth and where the notes of the world had not yet been tuned by others. Before she left, she handed me a sealed envelope. "If you ever feel the music returning," she said, "don't fight it. Play this instead." I did not open it. Some songs should only be heard once. Back in London, my flat felt colder. Lena had returned, accompanied by my mother's trusted contacts. She had begun playing again, not the sonata, but her own music. Uncontrolled, unpredictable, beautiful. A violinist no longer held captive by perfection. She sent me a letter. I played 3 notes in the square today. They were mine, not his. "I think I finally understand what you meant. Music is only dangerous when someone else decides what it means." I read it 3 times, smiling, then burned it, because I suspected others were still watching. I resumed my life as Enola Holmes. Sort of. I no longer simply solved mysteries. I sought frequencies, moments when a room went too still, a sentence repeated too often, a melody humming beneath someone's decisions. These were the Society's fingerprints now, and I had grown very good at hearing them. One morning, a box arrived at my door. No return address, no note. Inside, a single object, a conductor's baton, carved from dark walnut, wrapped in black ribbon, and engraved at the very base, E.H., my mother's initials, but not her handwriting. I held it up to the light, examining its weight. Balanced, precise, tuned. Then I noticed something odd. Not carved, burned, tiny marks across its length, seemingly decorative, until I aligned them with my tuning fork's shadow and realized they were musical notations, a final phrase, written not to be played, but to be understood, a warning, a command, a memory. The baton had been hers, then taken, then sent back. And the message was clear. They know I'm listening. I set the baton on the windowsill beside a stack of letters and turned to the fire. The manuscript Aurelia gave me sat in the coals, burning slowly, each page curling, then vanishing. Julius entered as the last page turned to ash. "You're sure?" he asked. "Yes." "The society will try to reconstruct it." "Then let them chase ghosts," I said. "We have the one thing they don't." He raised an eyebrow. "Unwritten music. The kind that can't be memorized, that can't be manipulated. The kind that lives in moments, not in measures." He smiled, then paused. A soft sound drifted up the stairwell from the street. A violin, 3 notes, played hesitantly, then again, stronger, then a 4th, a new one. We looked at each other. "Lena," I whispered, improvising. As I watched the fog roll in beyond Baker Street, I thought of my mother, of Aurelia, of every girl who had been made into an instrument and then chose to play herself. The society would rise again. They always do. But this time, we were ready. Because this wasn't about defeating a villain. It was about refusing to play the wrong song.